Okay, welcome to the Hermitage Conversations. As you can see, we're one monk less. Ajahn Kovalo has gone off back to school.
We'll miss him.
We'll miss him. We're happy to have him here. It's very nice living with Ajahn Kovalo, and we'll miss him, as you said. How are things going?
Pretty good. It was chilly this last week, Ajahn.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Very cold alms rounds.
but yeah, we had
Below freezing.
we did have a spontaneous person drive up on alms round today and give just she was stopping by White Salmon and had heard about the tradition like a day ago and read up on it and found out there was this hermitage, so she made cookies and was driving it to us. So out of nowhere it sort of came, and it's always very inspiring when that happens on alms round. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was good.
Yeah, the spontaneous offerings are they're quite sweet. But also to say that the non-spontaneous offerings are
Appreciated.
incredible.
Yeah, very
Just
appreciated.
over and over again, receiving food from the same people. So it's very kind, and we also get to think of those people when we eat their food because we know what they've given us.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Sort of regular donors we see every day, and many of them are here actually. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's very nice. So tonight we were going to talk about the Metta Sutta and Metta in general. I've had a couple of questions sent to us, and we thought we'd begin by reading out the Metta Sutta. So I think most people are familiar with this, but just reading it will help put it in kind of perspective of what we're talking about right now. Do you want to?
All right,
give it a
Ajahn.
go?
Sure, I'll give it a go. All right. So many of you will know the sutta, and we also, sorry, a bit loud. Here's the link to it in case you don't. Okay. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm, and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease, whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another, or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another, even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, freed from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding, but not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world.
Sadhu. Very good. I think the male beings be at ease.
I appreciated the page turn. It put me on the to see if I could remember it.
Very good.
What are your thoughts, Ajahn? I mean, there's that, and then there's some questions around various parts of it as well, but it's certainly a seminal sutta, you know.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that it's not kind of even the way that we are taught to practice it. The Buddha doesn't actually teach that way. In terms of the, I think it was a later rendition, the technique about using a friend and someone who is a difficult person, yourself, a mentor. These are all ways of generating loving kindness. But the Buddha didn't have like a sort of metta technique, so to speak. And this is sort of his recommendation. I think the first sutta where he recommends metta is when some monks were staying in a forest, and there were they were frightened by some of the celestial beings that were there, and or they might have I'm not sure, I can't remember if they were yakas. Do you remember?
No.
And
But
he
probably
said,
were.
go back. He told the monks, go back and then spread metta, spread loving kindness, and this allowed the monks to live in peace in the forest with the beings that were there. And I mean, it's interesting. He didn't say, do this particular chant so they'll go away, which is often one of the ways that we try to sometimes bypass a lot of problems and experiences that we have, is through getting those problems to go away, or wishing that they go away, which doesn't usually work so well. So I think metta is something that is quite helpful in that. Some people also talk about it as like acceptance, opening, allowing. It's a kind of softening of the heart, and
Monk Sumedho speaks about that a bit.
Yeah, and being willing to just allow yourself to experience what it is you don't experience, what's unpleasant, but to take that in not as something as like, oh, I have to bear with this, but more of a sense of like lovingly being with something that's difficult. So yeah, that's one of the some of the things I had.
How have you kind of found what skillful means, if you found to practice it in your life, Ajahn, like that have worked especially well?
I think that what I can tell sometimes is that there is a hardening of experience, hardening of the heart, that can occur out of aversion. There can be a lot of pain. There can be guilt and judgment against myself, or something like that. And the main way that I use metta is that it's like in opposition to those things, in a sense of like, oh right, there's an alternative to the experience of kind of that aversive tendency of the mind or of the heart to push away, to get away from, or to wish ill will towards another person or a situation or myself. And whenever I notice that these things come up, these sort of akusala dhammas, unskillful mind states, then that's an opportunity. I kind of see like, oh right, there's this different possibility that's open, and it's a possibility of being caring and considerate, concerned, loving, and soft and gentle, that is really in opposition to that way of sort of a hardening, I think.
Yeah.
And so then that opens the heart. Oh, there's a different way of being, and it takes some time to settle through that, because of course it can be you're dealing with some difficulty. So that's just some of the ways I've used it. Of course, with the traditional phrases, it's been helpful. I found that very useful, especially like with a mentor or someone who I trust and care for, and don't have any enmity towards. So I find that quite helpful and useful.
Bringing them to mind.
Yeah, bring them to mind, wishing them well. How about yourself? What do you...
Yeah, I mean, you're right with when the hardening of the heart happens. For me, it happens. I don't notice it a lot of the time. It's not like it sort of pops up and it's really, visible. A lot of the time, it's just, you wake up and there's the image of the person, that you're really having a problem with, and it's sort of this, like I've said before, like this low level thing. So you're speaking about it kind of as these qualities of metta as this place where you can step away from that and get some perspective is absolutely true for me. And I think that's why it's so important to like keep, my teacher Ajahn Anan always says to keep maybe like begin every meditation with metta. And for me, having a bit of it in the day, especially right after I wake up, is very powerful, and it sort of pervades the whole day. And these states are referred to as the boundless states, and I think that for me they have that quality in a lot of ways. in that if I intentionally cultivate that at right when I wake up and before I go to bed, like it just pervades my whole life and changes the quality of everything. And they're very potent. The Buddha talks so frequently about how one who has sort of this loving mind state, like old karma, is just like a little bit of salt in the Ganges. It's like much less potent. So yeah, I've found right when I wake up, if you bring the awareness to the heart, I find that because this subconscious is so near, it's like the heart's very malleable right then. So any effort put into loving kindness right when I wake up pays like a lot of dividends, so to speak. And then that technique Luang Por talks about around, if you like send metta out, I find frequently it takes a lot of energy. But if you shrink the people and bring them into your heart, it's sort of it contains the field more, which is very helpful for me. So yeah.
I think the way you're talking about it, like with waking up, is it's quite helpful, because it's sort of like we're caught off guard a lot of the time, and like waking up is often a time when you're kind of waking up, oh, I'm back in my body again, and so it's kind of like a time where like, oh yeah, I can catch myself before, because the mind just as soon as the waking up occurs, the mind just starts moving and churning, and all of a sudden it's like, all right, back in the world. And we've also emerged from like another world we've been experiencing for the past 4 or 5 6 hours, and then just thinking about it again, like with that kind of metaphor around like muscle building or something, like building that metta muscle, like we are constantly needing to refine and to work on and to hone a skill, and essentially like just remembering like, oh right, like there is something that's my heart might be moving in a direction that's unskillful, or even catching it before that, and then all of a sudden oh yeah, metta, that's right, I have a potential to use the word boundless, which is quite beautiful. I mean, boundless is amazing because it means there's really no end to it. So yeah, I think essentially at any time you're strengthening that muscle, you're starting to use metta, then you have the potential to move your mind in that particular direction. And that's all we're really doing is learning that skill, I think. And then what arises out of that is a mind that, as we see from the sutta, is it's like very strong and open and caring of the world, caring of others, and it can transform one on the path in order to reach the end of the path. So it's got that potential.
I agree. And you're also pointing back to the sutta around so many of these things the sutta goes into these 15 different qualities that one has to cultivate in order to become, really produce or cultivate metta at a deep level. So these are all, factors one has to cultivate in one's life, like being straightforward in speech. And for me, the one that always really hits home is unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways. I don't know. Yeah, it's irrelevant.
That can be a bit of a controversial one in a monastery because you can't have a lot of duties in a monastery. So I think one of the ways that people say that is like, what, like some of the monks will grumble and say, I'm supposed to be unburdened with duties, and the teacher will say, right, it's the unburdened part. You have duties, but you're unburdened with them, so you don't feel the burden of them. And that's, I think it's both. I think it's both. That as you're mentioning, like that line is pretty strong. The frugal is also quite beautiful, but how do we become unburdened with duties? How do we not have a heaviness, carry around a heaviness of heart around what we're doing? And yeah, I think it's quite important to try to relate to that, because so many of us burden ourselves, and that's sort of like an anti-metta activity, creating dukkha around whatever it is that we're doing, because we have a choice not to.
It's the same sort of hardening of the heart, like you referenced.
Like someone was just talking about practicing gratitude in the morning, and gratitude is very much a part of metta. I find it's really acknowledging the good that's been done. And so that, that's another way where one can really say like, oh, I don't have to be burdened by these things. I can find some gratitude in them. Like I'm not starving right now. I'm not having to kill somebody. I'm not having to do these things that are going to cause pain in the world, and one can have gratitude for that, and then kind of switch that. Oh, I guess I'm not as burdened as I thought doing this thing I don't want to be doing, or whatever it might be.
Well, you bring up a good point also, and it ties into the question we received online around a good translation of metta, and the questioner was asking a bit about like what are, and is there one paragraph specifically?
I've been confused about its different notions, like acceptance by Ajahn Sumedho or goodwill by Ajahn Nisabho, and what these imply for a formal metta practice. So I'm assuming formal metta practice would mean like sitting and trying to practice with metta. Like for example, the Karaniya Metta Sutta gives really nice and grounded examples, and its development. But when it's in its development, but when it gets to radiating kindness over the entire world, I wonder how to radiate kindness to the whole world when, like in my case, I'm just starting baby steps in directing kindness towards myself to begin with. I already struggle to direct it even towards my neighbor, other than during retreats when it's easier to feel this. In common life, you develop metta to all through acceptance of the way things are. As a question, goodwill, wishful thinking. I feel I might be missing or have misunderstood something. So any clarification or guidance would be very much appreciated.
For me, it ties in because you're referencing gratitude, and it's not formally on the list, but you're right, it ties right in. And just briefly, I think, yeah, unburdened by duties, like Ajahn Cunda says, like definitely doesn't necessarily mean having no duties, just maybe not holding them too heavy. Although having too many can be a bit...
It's both. I think it's both.
A little bit of both.
I think one has to check oneself for how many duties one's carrying. Yeah. But also, we all have duties. There's nothing, I mean, you can't just like live... I mean, I guess some people live completely pampered lives where they have nothing.
Yeah, that's not the case with Doug Robnett, who's my father.
So we're gonna have duties, and so how can we be unburdened by them? So we don't feel the weight of them, even though we're doing them. You can have a joyfulness around the duties you do. And so, but getting back to the question here around formal practice in this, I think the first thing that I notice is baby steps, and so that's always very important to remind ourselves that, well, yeah, radiating loving kindness over the entire world, that's okay. That's like there's possibilities. So I think that's sort of like your aspiration is something that you can hope to have that as a possibility. But like you might not feel that. You might not feel that you have that capacity, but that's still an aspiration. And because one has that aspiration, it's like, oh yeah, but there's still a potential. I'm open to that. But also, like, yeah, just baby steps means you're starting where you are, and that's part of metta, is to be okay wherever you are starting. That's the whole question around acceptance. So I think one might wish, like, oh, I wish I could offer metta to all beings, but it just might not be there for you. And so baby steps is good. Just kind of start with a little bit. How can you generate the feeling a little bit? Some people maybe spend years not having any possibility of generating a moment of metta because they don't know what it is. And so if this person who's written is able to do it during retreats or at times in meditation, I think that's quite a good start. So sort of the point of the formal practice, as I was talking about in the beginning, is that you start with what's easy and then you work towards what's difficult. So I would say all beings in the universe is probably maybe the most difficult. So drawing back to like either somebody you're inspired by, or if you're able to do it with yourself, then those are really important places to start. And some people have a problem even with wishing metta to themselves. They think they're not worthy of that. So then you have the possibility of finding somebody who is, If you can't find like a mentor, I was suggesting maybe kittens or puppies or something like that.
Sounds cheesy, but it works.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you
Well,
kind of think?
I think what you're referencing around there's a few points. I mean, one is around these different aspects of metta, you know, and gratitude being sort of tied right in, and these different translations from like goodwill from Majin to Nisabho to love from Ayakema. You know, for me, metta sort of the goodwill is a good translation because it's a gentle inclining of the heart towards caring for others. And then for me, the other three qualities on that list of karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy, and upekkha, equanimity, are reactions of that basic inclining of goodwill to different situations. Like if you encounter someone in suffering, then the natural reaction of that inclination is karuna or compassion. And if you encounter someone in who's doing well, then mudita is the natural reaction. And then if there's a situation that you can't affect in the moment in a skillful way, then equanimity sort of is every one of the Buddha's lists has a representative of a wisdom in it to sort of check all the others. And I think equanimity is that. And yeah, and I think also significant that the Brahma realms, like in Buddhist cosmology, Brahma is depicted with four faces. So it's kind of interesting, like, you know, these are the Brahma Viharas is what they're called, but they have these four faces of four aspects almost. And as you said, like, I think starting where you can and whatever you can do to get that feeling kindled in the heart and then making it grow. And I think even though the traditional advice is to start with yourself, a lot of Westerners can't do it. So kittens isn't a bad start. I like Ajahn Karuna Dhammo recommends imagining someone who cares for you, sort of caring for you, and bringing that home. And for me, that works really well. So yeah, I think but the important thing is how you get that beginning in your heart, and then you can bring people into it. For me, that works well. But yeah, starting with myself is very hard sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that even like I was just thinking when you were saying people who do caring things for you and remembering them doing those things, I think that's like if you just think about parents and it probably should just come very easily, like how, you know, to being able to wish one's mother, one's father, or whoever was a primary caregiver. But for some people, these are charged relationships sometimes, and they're not so easy to suss out. So they might, again, not to take to kind of hold that against oneself and for one's, well, I should be able to wish my mother metta, and yeah, but there's that you should be able to, and that's the problem. Is again, it's like a pressured pushing down of almost aversion. Like I'm going to make you have to, you know, fit into this mold of like what a good person should be able to do. And I think with metta, that's where a lot of people really get caught up is I should be able to feel it. What's wrong with me? And you're just getting caught up in aversion again with all of that. So we start with what we can. And if it's not yourself or a mentor or your parents, whatever it is, you just got to figure out that thing that helps you generate kindness and your wish for kindness for another. And it's not, you know, it's not always easy, especially as you mentioned with ourselves, giving metta to ourselves.
And like you said, sometimes the best you can muster is, like Longpo Sumedho says, you know, peaceful existence with the unpleasant.
Yeah.
Is sometimes what metta is going to be, and that's enough. It's just not shooting yourself with a second arrow. And he also references the fact that consciousness accepts everything, and so in a way, it is metta embodied. But like you said, Ajahn, like you begin where you are, and Ajahn Amaro, I appreciate, says you have to be quick on your feet with metta, because if you are kind of trying to send metta to someone and it's just not working, so frequently, for me at least, the realization is like, oh, I'm the one that actually needs the metta right now, you know, and you have to like recognize that, otherwise it's just beating your head against a wall, you know, something.
Yeah, and essentially, that's a really important point, is that the practice of metta benefits others, but the primary benefactor is ourselves. So when we become a sort of a vesicle of generating loving kindness, people feel that around us. But it's also a practice that is, allowing all of these things that the Buddha is recommending in this sutta, to the point of realization. And that's not to be, I think, misunderstood as like trying to kind of grasp metta as like I should be a person who is able to be kind to others, and if I'm not, then I'm a failure. And that like we're kind of placing ourselves in the world as this kind of object. We're objectifying ourselves as someone who must be a particular way. So I think that as you were talking about, acceptance is probably the beginning of metta, where just being with the unpleasant is enough. The fact of a lot of us just want to keep pushing it away, and as you were talking about with Poor Tomato, it's more of a sense of like, well, can I not do that? Can I at least be with it? I don't have to transform it into this really pleasant feeling if that's not possible right now, but actually can I stay with it so that it's not something that I'm actually actively pushing away. So I think that's a helpful way of looking at it, where we want to really try to start, again, coming back to that, start where you are, these baby steps, and see what it is you can do kind of with the practice, and experiment with it.
I think that ties, I agree, Ajahn, and I think that actually what you talked about in terms of the main benefit being for oneself ties quite well into the question that was emailed and what Sumrit's asking around metta helping departed loved ones if they've gone to the lower realms.
Yeah. So we actually have another question that as was asked on the chat there, but also this was sent to us, and I'll read specifically. I would appreciate help with a question. Childhood friend of mine passed away last summer, and this person only just found out about it. They were close since they were 12, but as adults, the communication could be sporadic due to the unfortunate fact that this person's friend was an alcoholic and often clouded. So this person said, I'd like to do some kind of meditation or prayer for him to have a good rebirth, but is it true he is by now no longer existing in that consciousness I once knew? I've been dedicating meditations to him, doing goodwill towards him, and vowing to go deeper on my path and dedicating that vow to him. Is there anything I can do as a layperson after the fact when I become aware that someone has passed away, but some time has passed? And everything I just read is great. So you are doing those things. That's essentially what dedicating merit is. It's sort of a sense that if from whatever goodness that has arisen out of what I've done, then I wish to give that goodness to another person. I wish to have them benefit from whatever I've gained. And sometimes people think by saying that you're like, you have a bank account and you're giving away your goodness. You're like, what? Well, I mean, aren't I supposed to be doing this about myself? And it's like, well, yeah, but the nice thing about dedicating merit, about offering the goodness that one receives through whatever one's doing, is that offering it up makes it even more supercharged for yourself. So it gives it like, and even because you're adding generosity to it, so you're willing to give it away, you're willing to spread it around, and you're not keeping it yourself. So just think of that as not as what it is you're actually, the thing that you're losing, but the thing that you're gaining. I don't think you're actually losing anything, but you're gaining from that wish to give to another person. It's like someone who gives their life for someone else. We can say, wow, well, they lost their life, what did they get out of that? But, well, another human being was given to, was saved. And so that's an incredible letting go. I'm not suggesting that somebody should do that, but we are benefiting ourselves, even though we might think like, I don't want to give something away. But I think the Buddha really says as much, in terms of dedicating merit or just trying to find ways you can be generous as really the highest gift to yourself, because it has so much benefit to the mind. What are your sense of?
Yeah, I mean, I
those
agree with
things.
everything you said, Ajahn. Um, just the power of dedicating merit. I mean, it's not an esoteric economy. It's asking another being to identify themselves with your goodness. And it really does have an effect. Like if you know someone's thinking about you and praying for you, it makes you feel good. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think the main purpose of funerals, of thinking of the dead, which is a ritual which is in almost every culture and has been largely forgotten in ours, which is very sad. Dia de los Muertos, the ancestor worship in China, giving offerings to the dead is a very old tradition in most cultures, and we forget our dead, and that's sad. And so I think recollecting these who've passed, even if it's a long time ago, in this way helps you change your relationship to them. Recollecting the good, dedicating this good, helping spur you along in your path. And I think it's mainly for you. But that being said, at risk of ruffling any dry materialist feathers, our tradition does, in Buddhist cosmology, does acknowledge the fact that there are other realms. There is something which goes on after death. Um, and from the teachers, the Buddha seems to speak mostly about dedicating merit, being available to beings that are closer in realms and who have more recently passed. Although if someone's in a ghost realm that's slightly below the human, and sort of stuck there as a preta, then the idea is that actually they can definitely receive goodness that we dedicate. And I've been in monasteries where we have, I was in Buddha Bodhiwana with Ajahn Kalyano, and after the meal, people came and was like, "Look, I've had this dream of my um, past mother in Sri Lanka, crying out, coming shivering, asking for food and clothes, and I don't know what to do." And Ajahn Kalyano was like, "You need to do goodness and dedicate it to her." And I asked Ajahn Kalyano about this. I was like, "What was that?" And he's like, "This happens all the time." And so, yeah, so I think it is, there's no downside to this. Like, if they're nearby, then it can help. I think in the days right after death, they say around 7 days, then apparently, yeah, it's especially potent. But even after that, if they're in a nearby realm, then dedicating merit does good. But as the Buddha said, when people who are skeptical of such things approached him, it's a good bet on either count. If there is another realm, then you've done good. And as he said, you've honored the dead. And if there isn't another realm, then you've cultivated metta and done something very beautiful. So, what are your thoughts, Ajahn?
Yeah, I agree on all that. That's great. I think the question about um, that such a long time has passed. We could say maybe there's some potent times to wish someone to dedicate merit, but I'm not sure. I mean, who really knows about how this all works? I think the Buddha would say this is probably another imponderable to try to figure it out. So just doing it, I think, is rather than questioning whether it's helpful or not for the person doing it, is, as you said, it's going to have a benefit no matter what. And that's where the Buddha was quite a genius in terms of his suggestion around, like, well, even if you're wrong and there is nothing after death, then look what you've cultivated in this life. And surely wishing someone well, who's passed on, is not gonna be harmful. And the other thing that you said was very important, I think, around transforming our relationships. And it's not, when someone dies, it's not as if their dying means that they've gone away. And we're just essentially like changing the parameters of how we related to this person. Um, there is, I think, a finality around it for most of us, those of us who can't talk to the dead, which I think are most of us. But basically, like that finality doesn't mean that there has to be a cutting off. So there can be in a sense, working with one's past relationships in a way that allows us to offer forgiveness to those people, forgiveness to ourselves, to allow, that sense of guilt that some of us carry around what we would have wanted to say or what wasn't said, or stuff that was, basically left under the carpet. We just, we weren't able to work through the relationship to the extent that we wanted. Then there's possibilities with how we relate to that person now. I know that I should say that metta is actually not so much recommended towards a dying person. That doesn't mean that it's never recommended towards a dying person, but it tends to be a bit difficult to do. It's not as easy, and so that's where dedicating merit can have a different effect. So I remember when I was learning about metta and the formal practice of metta, that was one of the things. Is you definitely don't want to start there with somebody who's passed on. It can be a bit complicated and difficult to work with, but it doesn't mean that one doesn't do that. However, merit and dedicating one's goodness to that person is something I think that's just accessible whenever, and it's also accessible with the living. So we want to also dedicate merit to especially for those of us who have had a good upbringing, but even those who've not had a good upbringing. Most of us have had parents or a parent or a person who cared for us when we were growing up, and some of that is mixed, but we can always find something good. I think one of the recommendations that I heard about somebody who was from a very abused background said that, well, no matter what you can say is that your mother actually carried you for 9 months, and that's something that isn't deniable. It might have not been as great a carrying as you might have wanted. There might have still even been challenges with that, but that we can feel, okay, there's some gratitude for bringing me into the world, and one's father in a similar way for bringing that possibility into the world. So there's always a way, I think, to find a path to dedicating merit and a path towards metta. But it's not, it's can be fraught. It's not so easy, and that's why the difficult person, or a person you're having difficulty with, or someone who's died, one has to be sensitive, I think, with how that's approached, because it just might seem like something that isn't very easy or approachable, and so you start with the baby steps, the easy steps first.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Are there more questions that?
We have the most important thing that was said to me right after my sister died was the relationship isn't over. It changed everything. Nicola was saying, Ajahn Sucitto once said, everyone is walking around with their causes and conditions, bumping into others' causes and conditions.
Yeah.
I like that. I recently heard a teaching from Longpo Sucitto that said self-forgiveness is respect for one's conditioning, for one's conditions. And it goes right into, for me, that same thing around, ways you work with difficult characters. Like you can try to work with metta very explicitly, but sometimes the best you can do is really look at and try to get to know what made them as they were and trace things back to the first noble truth and the initial wound, and then compassion can open from there. But yeah, I think if we did understand anyone's upbringing completely in their past, we would never be able to harbor ill will. And I think that's a really important principle to remember, that, especially in these fraught times.
Yeah, that's been brought up, I think, in almost half of our talks. We've touched on that a little bit, just sort of trying to have the space to see where, like, even someone like Hitler, that one could have compassion towards the fact that Hitler probably suffered, and we can know that like anybody really, that's an extreme case, but it's important to know that that metta is boundless, and that it really, the Buddha didn't say like everyone but this person, or I mean Mara is included in that, and Mara's done probably caused a lot more problems than Hitler as well. So it's very important, I think, to try to see that like whatever difficulty we're having with another human being, or whatever it is that we're finding, that metta is boundless, and there is a potential to feel metta for everyone, even though, so, well, I think everyone except this one person. And well, that's the one person you really want to see if in your life you can try to work through. So understanding people's backgrounds is as similar to your own. The fact that, people are usually just as totally screwed up and insecure and harboring resentments and all kinds of having all kinds of problems that we ourselves have, and we might project on them that they're not, or oh well, he's such a perfect person, but and we might have difficulty in that realm, but that's not really the case.
Well, and you bring up a good point around the projection, Ajahn, in that there's two words in this sutta, uju, sort of uprightness, and mudu, which means softness. And Ajahn Kovilo's brought this up. And I know Frank Ostakowski speaks about, and I think Stephen Levine talks about holding life with a strong back and a soft belly. And for me, there's like so much of our anger towards others is projected in inward problems of our own. And my sense is the more you come to rest in Dhamma, the more your practice is straight and pure, the more you're honest, the more you hold the precepts, the more grounded you are in the stream of Dhamma, the less projection there is out. And it's like that's the strengthening of that spine of morality and practice, and it allows for this softness to grow around it, because you don't have to hold yourself together with this projecting and white-knuckled clinging to these things that don't matter as much, but you're resting in something truly stable, and so you can afford to be very soft and giving around many things. And also just to say that, like, for me, like you said, like, not excluding anyone speaks to this fact that the path points to something truly transcendent in the human heart. Like, it doesn't have to be this ontological statement about nibbana, but just the fact that a Tibetan monk held in prison in China for 20 years can come out of that loving his captors, or, having love for them. Like, that's a love that is not subject to conditions in the same way as most love is, and that's transcendence. So yeah, I mean, I think metta held at that level speaks to the true potential we can strive for,
Yeah. And I think also thinking about, as you're talking about that sense of like, what is it to be, upright, so strong, but also soft. And I think of like words like authenticity, to try to be true to yourself. That's something my father often brought up with me, and as a statement is, just in all things that matter, just always try to be true. And the other is vulnerability. That's another word. So like authenticity and vulnerability. And I think that often the word vulnerable brings up for people a sense of weakness. But if you think about being willing to be vulnerable, that means being willing to put yourself in a place that isn't necessarily safe. And I don't mean to put yourself in a dangerous situation, but to be willing to be in a place where you don't necessarily feel safe, like with a person, or in a situation where, again, not dangerous, but it's something where you might feel uncomfortable. Like, oh, I don't really want to talk with this person, or I don't want to get into this. I never want to see this person again, and that vulnerability might be more something like, okay, I'm willing to try to open up and, show that soft belly, show that softness, sort of like a dog does when it turns over and it offers its kind of stomach to be rubbed. That's its most vulnerable position. I mean, it can't defend itself. And what it's saying, a dog is saying, I think it's saying, I'm not reading its mind, but is like, I'm willing to be totally open with you right now. I'm letting my guard down, And that's really what I think is a part of metta, is that we're dissolving the protective shell that we carry around ourselves, and we're opening so that we can actually allow accessibility for either another person in our own mind, or actually another person who's right there in front of us that we'd rather not open up to. And that doesn't feel safe all the time. That sometimes does feel like a danger to ourselves, but as long as it's not, I'm not suggesting, of course, a physical danger, or you put yourself in harm's way in that way, to like real danger in that way, but more emotionally, like being able to be open to another person that you think is possibly not going to go so well for you, or you're going to look bad, or you're going to not win the argument, or whatever it is. It's sort of that part of metta, I think, is quite important to bring in.
Belly rubs are never dignified looking. It's true, but
Yeah.
a life without belly rubs is a sad thing.
Yeah.
Metaphorically.
Yeah.
So it's a good reflection on John.
So we've reached the end here for tonight. It's been about 45 minutes. So we're going to wrap up now. And we're also going to start a new format. So I'll just let you know about that. So I'm not going to be on Friday mornings anymore. Venerable Nisabho is going to be getting into possibly a little bit more teaching after he leaves here, and he's asked if he could practice a bit more of teaching. And I thought about it a bit, and I thought, yeah, how about Friday mornings? So he's going to be giving Dhamma talks on Friday mornings, followed by like a brief Q&A, and it'll essentially be the same format, like 45 minutes and maybe a half-hour Dhamma talk to start with on a theme that he'll come up with.
And I can't plan it.
I've encouraged him in certain ways, and one of those was not to plan too much and just have an idea of what you want to talk about. I think he's very eloquent, and the Dhamma will flow quite easily. But if not, that's a learning experience in itself. So that'll be what's happening Friday mornings at 7. So it'll be Nisabho here. Maybe one thing is, I've also asked him not to look at the chat while he's giving a talk. So maybe if one thing you can do is also allow him to talk without having to check in on the chat, and people are giving thumbs down or whatever. That won't happen.
Do they have that?
No. But yeah, just we'll see how that goes, and that'll I'll probably do that for the next few months, and have you take over the Fridays, and then we'll still do these on Tuesday nights. So that's all we have. I think for this week, Nisabho we'll talk about a theme for next Tuesday on Friday.
We'll decide on it together.
Yeah, and we can clue people in on one of the announcements, right? So on what that might be if you don't come to Friday morning, the talk on Friday morning. So otherwise,
thank you, Ajahn. It's a pleasure to be part of this community. It feels sort of safe, a good place, but it's also just very nice to have these chats. And we will miss Ajahn Kovilo. He's off studying and all that, but we're hoping he comes back at some point, and maybe will at some point.
I imagine he'll come back to the Hermitage at some point, because he's got these school breaks.
Yeah.
So very good to be with you tonight, and have a good few days and a good week till I see you next, and a good few days till you see Nisabho next.
All right. Thanks, Ma and Pa. It's like...
Oh, yeah. Very good.
All right.